All right, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. My name is Noorlan Zafar, and I'm representing Finland Group today. On behalf of ACCA Pakistan, I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Very, very important, very, very relevant webinar that we have today, which is around corporate governance. How is the pandemic situation affecting corporate governance and board oversight boards across the world? We are very, very firstly thankful on behalf of Finman Group, which is a consulting group. We're very thankful to ACC Pakistan for giving us the opportunity, and for all the members who are joining us, who are live on this webinar today. We welcome all of you for taking out the time. We want that this is a very interactive session, and we have with us a very acclaimed, very renowned international speaker. He is the author of many books. One of the famous ones is something that you'll also be getting at the end of this webinar. We are joined by Mr. Rolf Ward, who's an international bestseller author, and he is also sharing this website as well, Boardroom Insider, that many of you must have gone through in your journeys learning about corporate governance. So welcome, Rolf, to this webinar.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever our members may be at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking out the time. We know that it's early morning your end, and we are joined by members from all across the globe. Just a little bit of housekeeping rules. We have these questions in chat boxes, tabs, which are available for you. We will be taking questions during and also at the end of the presentation as well. So please keep your questions pouring in. We would want that you also participate and make this a learning opportunity that we have here. So, Rolf, we know that the world is faced by this pandemic, and it has come across as quite a shocker to all of us who are in different job roles as well, and especially when we look at the overall impact that it has had, not only on small and medium enterprises, but also on the corporate businesses as well. Giants have suffered a lot of things, and we too know for a fact that there have been a lot of boardroom conversations as well on how the future for corporate governance looks like. How do you think that what has been the immediate impact of this crisis on the talks that are being conducted on a boardroom level?
I appreciate the chance to speak with the members here, the members of the ACCA, and all of the other attendees who've joined us today. The large turnout, I think, shows how important everyone has viewed this topic and how many of you out in the business world everywhere on the earth are trying to deal with governance issues remotely now in a time of incredible crisis. You already know about the impact that the coronavirus has had on our lives and our economies. The World Bank in June said global GDP is expected to decline by 7.7% for the year. And the biggest losses are going to be expected in the East Asia and Pacific region. Could you go to the next slide, Nora? Yes, as you can see, World Bank consensus is that all of the economies of the world are going to be hit badly on this. The UAE economy is expected to fall 4.5%. Abu Dhabi alone is going to be 7.5%. India's economy is going to face its worst recession in 40 years, with the economy contracting something like 9% for the year. And Pakistan's economy has marginally contracted by 3.38% in the ongoing year, partly due to the coronavirus impacts here. Now, for all of the world's corporations, this has brought massive challenges, massive uncertainty. I know we're all aware of that. But this extends into the very top of the corporation, into the corporate boardrooms. Boards and directors worldwide are now convening in their boardrooms remotely. Everyone around the world, from the small and medium enterprises, state-owned enterprises, large corporations, partnerships. Everyone for literally centuries has had the model of getting together around a table, working out things, discussing, following up, handling disclosures, plotting strategy. Now everyone is having to do that remotely, and they're having to invent the tools and procedures for doing that as they go along. Norel, could we do the first poll here? This would be a good time. We've talked a little bit about where we're going here, and we're going to be doing polling today among the attendees, and I'd very much like to see what your responses are to some of these questions. We've now sort of covered the part of where we are and the part that you already know about all of the stress and strain on the global economy. Let's bring it into the boardroom. As I said, for several months now, boards have had to meet remotely. Could we go to slide 3 also, Neural? Yes. Coping with all of these crises, things that can destroy the company, and directors are very frustrated because they're simply cut off from company operations. They're having to do everything through telephones, through video screens, and trying to make that work. And then going forward, they're going to have to plot a route back to normal operations while dealing with all of these uncertainties, all of the limitations, and the weak economy that all the world is going to be dealing with at least through the next year. And we'll get to that in a few minutes here. But first, I'd like to give you some immediate tools to help your board of directors. How is a board supposed to meet when they can't actually meet face to face? And this is something everyone is having to learn now. All of you are somewhat familiar with online video meeting technologies, obviously, or you wouldn't be attending today. But using this technology to conduct board meetings that are safe, meetings that are effective, that are legal, is a challenge. Let's first start out by assuming that you've assured your board can legally do business by telephone with online technology. There are leaders from countries around the world attending our program here today, and every country has different rules on the use and powers of electronic board of directors meetings. These also vary depending on the stock exchange you might be involved with. Some of you, it might be vary depending on the rules of your government ministry. And to make things more confusing, most of these rules have been temporarily relaxed or modified in the last few months. India, for example, relaxed some of the rules on when board of directors must meet quarterly or periodically, and then also relaxed some of the rules under the Companies Act of 2013 to change this. These meetings will be considered legitimate as long as everyone is involved and can participate. The Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan is another example. In April, encouraged companies to pass resolutions by circulation rather than gathering the whole board together to hold face-to-face meetings. The ICSA in the UK, the Companies Act of 2006 generally allows electronic communications. All of these are different. France has waived some of their rules until July 30th of 2020. As I said, every country, every region, every specialty has its own rules, and they have been modified, so it's important to check them. However, there are a few things that are standards mostly around the world as requirements of this is what you need to have to assure that a board meeting that goes online is legal. Nora, could we go to the next slide, please? Here are the basic rules, and you can read them as well as I can. One of the things that I mention often when I do my boardroom trainings is never read off anything on a slide that's in front of everyone in the boardroom anyway. But I would like to point out a couple of items here because this shows the importance of following good procedure while you're doing a video board meeting or an online board meeting. Meeting notice needs to go out. You can't surprise everyone by saying we're taking the meeting online that was originally going to be in person and expecting everyone to be able to legally participate. Everyone should be able to make clear what their presentations are. or I'm sorry, what their participation is, and that they're able to properly. Quorum compliance, and that's something that we're going to stress a lot here, has to be well documented, has to be ascertained, and the board and company secretary have to be able to make sure that the quorum continues. One of the issues with online meetings is if someone hops up from the screen to get a cup of coffee, are they still part of the quorum? Are they not? Have you set out rules for making that? Summarizing of decisions by the chairperson is very important. I have an entire program on good boardroom procedures to make sure that these things happen, and some of you might be able to follow up some of these through FinMan group with us later. But one of the things that's extremely important is if there's a resolution under discussion, make sure that that is fully read and informed with everyone just before a vote is taken. I think we've all been in board meetings where someone came up with an idea, it was put into a resolution, you spent 15 or 20 minutes going back and forth discussing it, adding to it, subtracting from it. The chairman calls a vote, and it turns out that what you're voting on isn't what you were originally proposed, but no one notices that until the minutes come out. Don't let that happen, and that's even more of a problem with online meetings. And finally, a draft of the minutes need to be circulated to everybody soon after the meeting. And another thing that I'll stress here, and I'll mention this more later, is the importance of good minuting for online board meetings. Corporate secretaries do an excellent job when sitting around a table with directors, keeping track of who said what, and the art rather than the science of writing good minutes. When everyone is little postage stamps on a screen talking, it becomes a lot harder to take good minutes of what's happening here. So again, a lot of this burden falls on the company secretary, but they must be attentive on it. And one final note that I'll say here, and it's something that I touched on earlier, most of the national and stock exchange rules and waivers for online board meetings and shareholder meetings too, now that we're getting past that season in much of the world, were temporary. Many of these currently expire at the end of June or end of July. They may or may not be extended. They may or may not be modified. So it's vital to have your company legal staff and your corporate secretary stay up to the minute on these regulations, what changes are in place, which ones are coming, because it's very easy over the rest of the year 2020 to accidentally find yourself out of compliance. The next step in making your virtual board governance work is the hardware and software needed to make it happen. I'd like to go through this step by step because the first thing you should do is simply look at the lowest tech options. Keep it simple as much as possible. Despite all of the great online conferencing technology that we're all using at the moment here to talk with each other, sometimes it can be smarter and simpler to just hold a telephone telephone conference of your board of directors for quick approvals of some urgent matters, general catch-up, or a genuine immediate emergency. You simply can't beat patching everyone into a telephone call. Most of the regulations that I mentioned earlier from state to state and nation to nation on remote board meetings were originally written for telephonic board meetings anyway. So you're also certain that you're in compliance then. Simplicity has its value, and during a crisis, sometimes it can be easier to keep it simple rather than to go fancy. Another thing that I would mention, very important, is the use of the electronic tools that you already have in place for informing your board, for sharing information. Many of you are probably using an online board portal setup, by the way, and this is something which I encourage you to look into. Board portal technology costs have come down sharply in recent years. There are many vendors out there that offer good quality products. Nora, could you go to the next slide, please? Here are some of the major vendors around the world, some of the more popular ones. It's likely that the people who are attending today are working with one of these or with one of their competitors for sharing board information, for data, for sending out meeting notifications, electronic board packages. You've probably made some good use of these, but now is the moment when you need to make a better study of your online board portal technology. Look into the online video options that it might offer, voting, data sharing tools. It's likely that you haven't been exploiting these as much as you could, and now is the time to really dig into it. You may discover some great meeting helpers tucked away in the menu of items, and they're just waiting to be tapped and used. Online board information and delivery and review will likely be a big part of your virtual meeting. So invest some extra time in preparing and testing your portal. What sort of tools could you be finding in there? You may, and this is something that we'll go into a little bit later, you may have a boardroom disagreement on a topic. There may be a non-meeting of the minds, there may be dissent on something. I have a whole program on dealing with boardroom battles and how you will work those out, and some of you may be able to attend those if we schedule them later. This is the sort of thing that's usually negotiated outside of the boardroom in one-on-one cloakroom discussions between individual members. Everyone gets together, or the two competing members manage to work things out, come back to the board meeting, we have a vote, and everything moves on. With remote meetings with everyone at their separate locations, this compromise might never happen. Or something that could actually even be worse is directors might substitute texting or emailing during the meeting. They might grab their smartphones and start having side discussions here. That in itself is a very dangerous thing, and it's something that I wanted to mention. The text and messaging text technology most of us use on our smartphones is not only insecure, it can create a very scary later disclosure trial if someone wants to sue you, if something comes into disagreement down the road. Somehow you're going to have to present evidence of the meeting and how you handled that there. And there are a lot of dangerous things that can happen that way. Portals, most of them offer secure messaging technology that most boards aren't using yet, but this might be the time to use that. This is a very useful function within most portals. These are designed specifically with legal technicalities and legal discoverability in mind. And it lets you and the legal counsel fine-tune any chat and side discussions between the members to cover both retention and confidentiality needs. Again, a tool to use. Portals also offer online polling features, somewhat like the poll that we just did a few minutes ago here. Smart chairmen make good use of that. Before putting an item to a vote, a board chair can take a quick informal pulse check of how the board feels on something, who supports it, who doesn't support it here. And this is useful for the chair because you're going to be cut off from sitting around the room with these people, being able to judge the informal boardroom climate and feeling on something here. Very important on that. And also, many companies today are using online collaboration tools for their management, Slack, Microsoft Teams, such as that. But for sensitive issues, boards are now setting up workspaces for their managers inside of their board portals. Think about it here. The board portal is something that's completely separate from whatever the management team software is. If you're dealing with very sensitive issues, and a lot of your companies are at the moment, things like furloughs, layoffs, employee health issues, emergency succession, these are so sensitive that it can be unwise to cover them in platforms where general managers are able to tap in. So look into using your board portal for setting up a select area for select management members to take part. Nora, we have our next slide here. If we can go on that. Very good here. The next slide.
And we also have the results of first poll that we've done. So I'll just share it with everybody. You can also see that.
Yes, as you can see, everyone had to change their annual meeting plans for the year here, which is a whole other topic that I wish we had time to go into today on what best practices on that when you're trying to have an annual meeting and everyone can't get together. But the next item that I did want to get into here is smart use of board portal information dashboards. This is another terrific tool, and it's not only used, could we go back one here? Yeah, there we go. These are very important. I see boards of directors making a lot more use of board meeting dashboard, of information dashboards to visualize indices, finances, production measures, revenues, balance sheet information. This is extremely helpful for the board of directors because it is one of the ways that boards are actually able to do a better job than they used to be able to in a face-to-face meeting. Everyone here who has been on a board of directors, how many of you have had to deal with board book bloat, as they call it, over the last few years? The amount of information you receive before a board meeting has grown exponentially as there have been business crises, as there's been more regulation. Everyone in the organization subconsciously thinks, well, if the board knows about this, then I'm okay, it's clear. So let's push everything into the board book. The problem is that it becomes a great mass that the board of directors can't make use of, can't digest, and the smart board pushes back on that and says, boil it down, put it into a dashboard of information so I can look at all of these indices. This is something that tells me, yes, we're in compliance, we're marginal on compliance, we're out of compliance just by using a yellow, green, and red light structure here. These information dashboards are particularly useful for internal controls for the organization. And I want to mention a little bit about the value of that to financial controls and audit committees now. Earl, could we go to the next slide? Internal controls, next slide, please. Yes. We seem to have lost out here. Anyway, the next slide, I wanted to talk about internal controls here. I have something that shows there as a definition of what internal financial controls are. You can read it as well as I can, but this is from the online business dictionary site, and it's a very standard definition of what financial controls are. What do you notice about it here? Management controls. Managers use financial statements. What that's telling you is that all of the financial controls an organization sets up to monitor performance, to monitor compliance, to monitor financials are set up for the use of, by, and for the managers of the enterprise to make it easier for them to run things. That also means that they're not that friendly for the board of directors. And that can be something that's very important. Good use of online measures of the dashboard information makes that easier and more digestible, and it's particularly important at the moment for the audit committee of the board of directors, because you have to keep in touch and build good contacts with the CFO, with the audit staff, with your inside and outside audit firm contacts. Being able to have all of your information put into a nice digestible package, and that's something that the board portals help you to do, help the audit committee in particular to keep on track of things, because they've been cut off from many of their internal contacts now. So it's crucial to make good use of those. The next slide, please, Norel. Are we back online? Okay, slide 8, very good. All right, now we get into the actual video conferencing technology itself. You're likely using Zoom or Cisco WebEx or GoToMeeting right now in all of your online business operations. Your company tech staff are going to be familiar with these platforms, and most of the members of your board are already using them in their day jobs. So you know some of the nuances, and over the last couple of months, you had to get comfortable with some aspects of it. But currently, your operation, your organization, your members of your board are having to log in from a variety of hardware. The computer they're using at their end brings its own operating systems. Conferencing software will need to be downloaded. There are all sorts of problems that can come in, and let's try to get those sorted out before the board meeting convenes. Some of the conferencing programs work better on different operating systems than others. The web browsers your board members may be using at their end often make the video and displays look different. Try to remember this and bear it in mind. Further, their home and personal hardware may not be using the latest versions of their browsers or operating systems. So prod them a bit to upgrade. One virtual board meeting concern that can show up at the last moment is pipeline problems. When you have company computer networks, the conferencing servers, your director's last mile connections, all getting together, you're going to have bandwidth and buffering problems. And plus the whole world, as we see right now, is trying to get online with conferencing. So that leads to further data traffic jams. Now, finally, and this is something that applies very much to the board of directors, there's the human factor, your board members themselves. If we are honest from our own personal experience in the boardroom, we have to admit that the most common way vital board information is leaked or lost or goes astray is through mishandling by individual members of the board. This happens in the virtual world as well. If you have members of your board who are attending the board meeting where you're discussing and sharing extremely confidential matters for the company, and they're attending via their smartphone while strolling through a public marketplace, maybe using a shared Wi-Fi connection, there are going to be all sorts of dangerous security issues involved. This means that you need to lay out some firm protocols on the equipment and access that your board members are using, when they use it, how they use it. Stress good behavior and professionalism. Your company IT staff, the company secretary, and board chair also need to verify and practice early to assure that the technology that you're using, that something that might work great in theory and in practice session is actually going to work when the board meeting is gavelled into order. Now, the global lockdown has also driven change in how boards of directors meet, how they conduct their business, how they stay informed. As I mentioned earlier, this is actually an opportunity for your board of directors. The board model that we have today in so much of the world is something that traces its origins back several hundred years to a group of British squires getting together for a trading company, things like that, 200-300 years ago. But we're still using the same model, many of the same tools. And this is a good opportunity once we've gotten ourselves shaken out of the boardroom to look at how our boards meet, how we inform ourselves, how we do business, and actually make it work better in some ways. That's good to know here. One of the things that I've found that's scariest about hacking or intrusions is probably that for every one that we know about, there are 2 or 3 that we don't know about. If they're a very good hacker, by definition, we'll never know that they were actually getting in there, stealing information, or even right now are poking around in our networks. Could we go to slide 9 here? The quote. Yes, this is a comment in a May article I read in the Economic Times by Harsh Goenka, chairman of the RPG group in India. As I said, you can read what he says here, but he made a very good summary of the points that I'm seeing when it comes to board meetings today. Informality is a good summary of the change that we're seeing. Decisions are being made quickly. They're being made without all of the clutter and all of the formalities that usually go into a board meeting. all of the discussion and parliamentary rules. They're able to be made quickly. They're better able to use input from management teams. The board of directors becomes more of a floating concept than it does an actual group of people gathered around the table. Now, there can be some dangers with this informality, and I'll get back to you on that in a few minutes here. I have a whole webinar on making board meetings more effective, which is again something that I'd love to share with you down the road. But there are a few specifics that apply right now that I'd like to get to. First is that the concept of the standalone board meeting itself as a discrete item is starting to be questioned online. In-person board and committee meeting programs typically extend over 1 or 2 days. There's a very set schedule of how everything happens. Well, obviously you're not going to have a 2-day conference call to do that. So everything by definition is breaking down those walls. Virtual board meetings should work in modular bite-sized pieces today. The maximum for a virtual board session is about 2 hours that you can keep everyone focused. And after that, take a break, shift to other things, other committee meetings, things like that, then come back to the board meeting. And as I mentioned, this also lets you better integrate board committee meetings. Virtual meetings break down the walls between the board and its subcommittees. Most video platforms allow administrators to toggle back and forth between full groups and subgroups. This works perfectly with the board of directors. Committees can even duck out for a quick chat session while the full board is meeting and then toggle back in. Just by throwing a few switches or clicking the mouse. But note that legalities on things like quorums, on attendance, and recording of votes is trailing behind the technology. So it's crucial to assure good minuting of board and committee actions. You do not want to find yourself a year or two down the road in court with poor or no records of a very important board decision that you made today. Could we go to the next slide, Nora? For that matter, this is a good opportunity to shake up the board agenda itself to work with virtual meeting realities. Directors are better able to put their isolation and being cut off from some of the regular business involvements to put more time into review of board books and materials before the meeting. Then your online FaceTime can be better spent on board discussion and voting, strategy, the things that really matter. And some board agenda elements just don't work well in a remote meeting. Overall FYI, education items, training, board busy work items. Some of these are better postponed for later in the year. Some of them you might wonder, why are we doing this at all? Push off also big strategic discussions, mergers and acquisitions, sales of substantial assets, major strategy items until later in the year if it's possible. Some of these are better handled and are better validated with a regular in-person meeting. Board materials and presentations need to make change too, and we're not just talking about the use of the portals. There is no more time for long, mind-numbing PowerPoint displays and staffers reading off long reports. Directors online are not going to sit through an hour-long slideshow anymore. How many of you have been in a board meeting with a long and interminable death by PowerPoint presentation by staffers? How many of you have been in one of those where not only did the slide presentation go on, but the staffer had to sit there and read off from his paperwork everything that you were looking at on the screen? You didn't like that when you were all sitting around a board table. Now is your opportunity to smash that model to bits. You don't have to do that anymore. Still, make sure that your board portal has all of the up-to-minute board information and that staff practice on any remaining slide decks or presentations in advance. You can expect more homework from your board of directors now. Everything doesn't have to happen inside the board meeting for them. And also, all of this trimming for online board meetings doesn't mean the board should skimp on its governance duties. Instead, I'm seeing more chat and discussion outside of the board meetings, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, working out issues, coming to a consensus, and using the online time more for the formalities and things that have to actually be done when you can look at each other. Those are the first two parts of our discussion. Now it's time to move on to the next. Slide number 11, please, Noral. The road back. Where do we go as a board from here? The world economies are slowly trying to emerge from the COVID shutdown. The crisis immediate response, putting out fires that's been needed over the last few months, is trying to shift to long-term company survival, finding your way back. Where do we go from here? Today, companies are heading into the second half of the year 2020. The board role is just as crucial now. In fact, it might be even more vital, because instead of seeing the company through an immediate crisis, things that in many cases management itself had to handle and take into their own hands, the board now has to help plot a course back toward a long-term future for your enterprise. This is a huge task, but the burden is still going to fall primarily on the management team. But the board should ask some questions about their comeback plans, their stability plans, and where they're going. Be involved at this point. As I said, most of the burden is going to fall on your management team. As a board over the last few months, you've probably been leaning in more, helping management out, saying, can I make contacts? Can I reassure stakeholders? What can I do? Can you give me some homework? And that's good of you to do. That's going to continue, but now it's more a matter of management taking it from here. Here are some things that you as a good board should be asking your management team about their plans. How have short and long-term financials been hit by the crisis? How are projections for revenues, cash flow, liquidity, and other related items expected to change over the remainder of the year? What's the status of our lines of credit, our loan covenants, and other financing? How will long-term investment and capital spending plans need to change? Everything has been shaken up now, and you need to deal with that. There's some specifics on this, include how your board audit committee will continue to meet remotely. Who back at the company is taking part in the audit and finance process for the quarter, given that members of the financial team may not be available. Some of them may be sick, some of them may have childcare or connectivity duties. The audit and finance staff back at the company has been shaken up. Who are you dealing with now? How will you be able to keep those connections? What new accounting issues have arisen, for example, things like leases or debt coverage, the items that we mentioned earlier, and how will they specifically come to the attention of the audit committee? Filings and disclosures need to involve new issues about which there is still uncertainty. You just don't know about the length of a lockdown, regional impacts of the pandemic, what some of the financial implications are. How is your audit committee dealing with these in disclosures and filings? And also, has the audit committee assured that any ethics or compliance issues that arise are being reported properly? And are they still on top of these here? So a lot of people take the attitude that a good crisis is something that shouldn't go to waste. Bad actors in a corporation outside of the corporation view it that way as well. The amount of hacking that's going on computer networks, for example, has skyrocketed over the last few months because of all of the people working remotely. Bad actors know this is a good opportunity to exploit some of the data irregularities. And there are other cases where corners are being cut that shouldn't be cut. Does your audit committee have a good pipeline on these compliance and ethics issues? Next question, how healthy are our suppliers, our customers, our banks, vendors, logistics sources? What do we know about changes in their stability, their capacity, ownership? Are there disruptions in delivery, timeliness, support, pricing? Have we as a company looked into renegotiating leases, contracts, payments, or loans? These aren't just negatives, but there are also some opportunities, aren't there? Are there any M&A, purchase, or strategic talent opportunities we should seize at the moment here? Everyone is in distress. There might be some distressed assets that we could take advantage of. Have you looked into that? Ask that from the board. Ask to see details and timelines on the plans for reopening facilities and recalling employees. What steps are you taking to assure employee safety? Prove it to us. Are you going to keep our people safe? What are the projected payroll, employment, and hours worked over the next quarter? How does that compare to the first quarter of the year? What layoffs, furloughs, and other changes were made in manpower, and what have we done to ease the impact for our people? Have we made pay cuts in the organization? Are they equitable from the top of the company to the bottom? What messages are we as a board receiving from shareholders, family owners, promoters, those in a government ministry that might have power over us? What are they saying about how we've responded thus far? Have they been supportive of our crisis management, of our leadership team, our strategic changes? What concerns can we expect to hear from them going into 2021? And finally, going forward, what lessons have we learned as a company and a board in the crisis that should reshape our corporate structures, our strategies? For example, leadership evaluation and succession planning. How does that need to change here? For most companies, even some major ones, emergency chief executive succession is often just a name in an envelope we tear open if a disaster strikes. You need now more depth and development on that plan. What if a key executive is temporarily incapacitated instead of just leaving altogether? We're all familiar with the case in the UK of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, incapacitated with the coronavirus for several weeks. It triggered a parliamentary crisis because they were never set up to deal with a temporary situation where the leader was out of pocket. Would that be a problem in your company if something similar should happen? Leaders today need more resilience, ability to lead by example and communicate. Your leaders and the next generation of leaders now, you need to look at them from the boardroom with a different lens. I think of the parable of peacetime generals versus wartime generals. People can work their way up in military organization in peacetime by being good organizers, by being good administrators. When a war suddenly strikes, you find out some of those good peacetime generals aren't really good wartime leaders, but some that weren't so good during peacetime are thrust into the front lines and turn themselves into genuine leaders that an organization needs. That happens in companies as well, and you need to take these things into consideration when dealing with the rising generation for succession planning. What will the next generation look like? What lessons have we learned that they need to have that we may not have considered in our next generation of leaders 6 months ago? Many of the rising people in Western economies now may not have experienced the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009. What we're going through now is their first real test. From the boardroom, it's wise of you to ask, how well have they met that test? Could you go to slide 12 now, Noral? We're done with the remarks on our presentation here. I'm certain that we have some questions that have come in, and this would be a good time to address them.
Yes, absolutely. No, I love that analogy that you just shared, that peacetime leaders and wartime leaders. And indeed, I mean, there has to be these a lot of discussion, Ralph, around
Noral, your sound has gone out for me.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I was just saying that since we are in war times, we are dealing with a crisis, and it has just come at the blink of an eye. What skills do you foresee that would be a must for boardrooms and for management to have so that they could deal with these crises?
This goes into another thing that most companies don't do well with, and that is crisis planning and emergency planning. Too often, there are a few basic things that have been laid out when we have a crisis strike at the company, when we have a sudden loss of leadership, a legal situation, a compliance issue, something wrong with our stock exchange, a major disaster, something like that. I've found that even very large multinational companies are often taken short by this. British Petroleum was considered 10 years ago a leader in safety management issues. Then they had a massive explosion at one of their oil rigs in the Gulf Coast in the United States, and we found out that they really didn't have a good plan in place for dealing with that. Every company finds this, something like this happens, so it's good to do tabletop exercises and drive them from the board of directors. What happens if? What happens in another case? What happens in this situation? Who is the first person we call? I'm a member of the board. Do I want to get a call from a reporter at 8 a.m. in the morning asking my opinion of a disaster that just struck the company? If I get that telephone call, what do I do? Who do I contact? Who do I turn them on to? What should I say? What shouldn't I say? Boards that are effective are ones that are active in dealing with crisis management. But to do that, you have to have a plan laid out. The board needs to drive and hold management's feet to the fire and saying, how are we going to deal with disaster if it strikes? Show us the plan. Show us how granular the steps are and how much everyone knows what happens when it needs to happen.
Absolutely. So contingency plan in place, not when the crisis hits. It's actually something that you should be planning as well. And I would also just thinking at the top of my head, Rolf, I think in the circumstances, because you just mentioned that we don't really know how long the crisis is going to carry on. So would you also suggest or recommend that it has to be a complete the evolution of plans as well? So a plan that you make today might not be so relevant 2 months down the line or 6 months down the line if this situation persists the way it is right now.
That's another good point here, because most disaster planning tends to deal with immediate impacts and immediate turnarounds here. Then the problem will be solved, and a week from now we can get back to business. What happens if it is a long-term situation? Is that something that the board has asked about? When I do my boardroom exercises and talking with boards, we do several crisis planning scenarios here. I lay out a crisis that strikes to the board of directors and ask, how do we handle this? How do we deal with it? And I usually get some good responses. Well, we need to do this. We need to talk to this person here. One of the very things that hardly ever is mentioned when I say that is they say, well, we get out our crisis management plan and we follow it. No one ever thinks of doing that, and that is a sign that there isn't a crisis management plan in place. Everyone is making it up as they go along. And this also gets into the matter of depth. I mentioned this earlier, I just touched on it, but it's very important for leadership succession planning, the name in the envelope of what happens if a CEO is incapacitated, leaves, falls off the back of his yacht in the Mediterranean or whatever here. But what about the next level down? You lose the CEO, the new CEO is someone who might come down with the coronavirus a week into the job. What is the next fallback situation we have? And also, are we able to deal with leadership under various situations? The need that you will have in an interim chief executive if the CEO says, I'm leaving for a new job, is going to be very different than the need you'll have if the CEO is marched out of the office by prosecutors for a legal matter. You'll need someone who can come in and clean up as opposed to someone who's a caretaker. Do you have someone on the board of directors who can come in immediately as a leader if something happens? Is that something that you should put in part of your board of directors talent planning process?
Excellent. No, I think some very, very relevant points. And the way I look at things is, Ralph, from your discussion is that it's not necessarily a conversation that only takes place in the boardrooms as well. It could be a bottom-up approach as well. Somebody who's working at a lower management level could also initiate these discussions for the board members to also, put it as part of their agenda. Just like you said, that we have to shake the agenda a little bit. So we should look into the possibility of actually all the attendees, because those attendees who are not in the boardroom state as yet, but they could still have these discussions with their top management, with their board members as well, to take this forward. So a very, very relevant relevant discussion. There is one more question that has come in. I'm going to interpret it in the way that I have, is looking at the regulator's point of view. So keeping the regulator's viewpoint in mind, you did mention the Securities and Exchange Commission's Pakistan. What if the SOPs cannot be followed? What if the policies and the timelines could not be followed? What do you suggest should be a policy for companies to actually take forward and follow?
Then it's a matter of having to sit down with your legal staff, chief legal counsel, and ask if we are going to be out of compliance. How do we handle that? How far out of compliance do we want to go? Have we made contacts with the exchange or the regulator to plead our situation as a special matter here? This is where communication between your regulatory body, the stock exchange, and whoever handles it is very important. If you are going to find that it's simply not possible to meet a filing deadline, to have something covered, you want to let the regulator know immediately that that is going to be here a problem, and this is how we deal with it. You've got a poll in front of you right now on financial filings or disclosure deadlines on which your company faces uncertainty. This is good, and I think it raises a valid point. Not just we know we're going to be out of compliance because we can't simply deal with this in time. There's also the one where we might be out of compliance because we simply do not know what the regulation is going to be on this going forward. If we're a company that, say, has our annual meetings later in the year, will the regulations on how annual general meetings are to be held, notification, location, things like that, are they going to change? We simply don't know at this point. So it's a matter of sitting down with legal staff and coming up with a best scenario. This seems like the most likely way of dealing with it. And also, as I said, getting in touch with your regulators, pleading your case, asking for their guidance, because they're the people who can help you the most.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just sharing the results of the poll as well. And I think your answer also reflects very well on the results that we're seeing from the poll. So there is 42% are saying that yes, there is going to be some deadlines that are not going to be met.
If you look at the poll information here, it's interesting because really, if the way the question is phrased, yes and don't know should be lumped together, as they're both uncertainties here. Absolutely. So if you do that, little better than a third of the people say no, they are certain there won't be any uncertainties here.
Yeah, which so we're quickly running out of time, but I think we can squeeze in one more question, Ralph. We did touch base on what does the human element look like, and there is a lot of discussion around employee job security. People do have this fear, and rightly so. With economies like ours, we have to take a strong stance. So what do you think should be a policy that should be discussed at the board level for ensuring that the employees have the sense of job security?
This is important now, and it's an entirely different area that we really need to discuss, and should have probably, if we'd had the time, is environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG. This is something that has been pushed a little bit to the back burner in the recent couple of months here, but it's actually coming back very importantly. Corporations having to look after their stakeholders, their employees, their communities more than was traditional in a lot of cultures here. And that especially includes employees now. There's been a huge amount of resentment about employees being laid off, being furloughed, facilities being closed, and top managers, some of them have put off getting their paycheck for the quarter, but they're still perhaps getting a large amount of stock options and equity to make up for it here. That's looking bad, and it's going to look even worse going forward. So the board of directors, I think, needs to talk to the chief executive and the top team and be honest about it. And we'll sometimes have to say no to the chief executive here. This is something that affects our entire organization. If there's going to be pain, it must be shared pain. We want to keep our people on as long as we can, even if we have to cut back some pay, have to cut back some hours, partly because things are going to come back and we don't want to destroy our infrastructure. And maybe even more important, we don't want to destroy the culture that we have built up with our people. This is a great opportunity for the board of directors to be the advocate for those employees and the stakeholders in the company.
Fantastic. So we've got a lot of feedback, Ralph. People have found this very, very interesting. And like you said, there's so many topics out of this as well that have come out, we have identified as well. I would just like you to spend approximately 2 minutes just telling people about Boardroom Insider as well, what kind of resources people could also find there so that they could give it a further read as well.
Yes, all of the attendees today are going to get a book that I published a few years ago called Boardroom Q&A. It covers many of the common items that come up here. Boardroom Insider is a magazine I launched in 1997. It's a little bit different from most of the publications having to do with corporate governance. Instead of looking at great, airy, top-down issues of governance, we look in a little bit about how do you run a board of directors more effectively, how do you deal with personal disputes in the boardroom, how do you make what is really a very nearly impossible job for the part-time outside amateurs on a board of directors possible by just pushing things a little bit forward for them, giving them a few more tools and information on making a board more manageable, getting on a board of directors, planning your own boardroom career, making yourself a better boardroom leader, working with members of management more effectively. I refer to it as the nuts and bolts of boardsmanship rather than governance. That's the focus that we have, and I've written 6 books on the topic. I have another one in the works, and once all of the coronavirus ends up, maybe I'll have some time to turn back to it again.
No, so all the best for the new book as well, Ralph. This brings us effectively to the end of the webinar. Just again, for all the attendees who are attending us, both the presentation and the book that Ralph is talking about, if you click on the handouts tab, you'd see that there are 2 handouts. The book is a present from Ralph to all of you to give it to read. It's a fantastic read. All of you who have attended the webinar as well and have some pending questions as well would find that very useful. I would also, on behalf of ACCA, would like to really thank you, Ralph. I'm representing Finman Group as well. We do have a corporate governance platform as well, where we have these discussions, trainings for the boardroom and directors as well. You could just go on the website that you see at the leftmost corner and get in touch with us as well. But on behalf of both ACCA and Finman Group, Rob, we'd like to really thank you for your time. It has been a very insightful discussion as well. And we have your book and we have your handouts as well. More power to all of us. I think all the key learnings from today's webinar, keeping ourselves more resilient, having an effective crisis management plan, thinking about your people, making sure that your presentations are not lengthy, crisp, to the point, and using resources that are already available at hand with a contingency plan in place. Very, very insightful discussion, and thank you so much to all the attendees who have been with us, and we hope that this has been very interesting for you. For all of the people who will be watching this webinar recording at end, just get in touch with the ACCA team or Finman Group, and we'll get the book and Ralph's presentation across to you. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the evening. You have a good morning as well, Ralph, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope to get a chance to work with you all again soon. Good day.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.